Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. We're going to try and do about an hour or so and have a conversation. One of the great pleasures of being a curator and being a scholar are the conversations you have with other people. And oftentimes we get to the point of an exhibition, and those conversations stop, when in fact that's when the conversations really start. So I asked Dyani White Hawk to come and join us this morning. She is a very, very talented individual in many ways. Many of you might know her as a painter, but she's also a mom, and she's learning to make jewelry now. She's here at IAI for a month's fellowship, and then she'll go back to Minneapolis, and then hopefully grace us again soon here in Santa Fe. But one of the things I was struck was just her knowledge. She doesn't make beadwork necessarily. It's not her art form at this point, but she wears it. She experiences it through her art. But I thought it'd be a little bit different to have things that way. A little different type of conversation. It's the types of nuanced conversations that really provide us with an understanding of these art forms. Now, just briefly, Ted Coe was an amazing collector. And Ted Coe is an amazing collector. He created the foundation to continue his appreciation of Native arts. And as we go through the exhibition, we'll talk a little bit about Ted, but mostly, I hope, hear from Dyani, and maybe some of you too have some comments. Ted collected the world. He collected indigenous arts. He also collected American and European art as well, but his real emphasis was on North America. And his emphasis on North America started really in probably in the late 1970s when he started driving through Indian country, which is all of the Americas, not just the West. When I was in DC, they always talked about Indian country as someplace out west, which I never quite understood. But he started driving, and he drove up to Alaska about 20 times in his lifetime. And along the way, he met people, he developed the idea of relationships, and he also ate great pie.
He would drive 5 hours out of his way for a good piece of pie.
And so part of the exhibition is connoisseurship, the appreciation, and the understanding, the ability to talk about artwork, and pie, because you need pie to think. So anyways, I don't know if you have anything introductory you want to say, or we'll just go start in the exhibition.
Sure.
I'm not putting you on the spot. But,
well, I guess my first introduction would be I actually do a lot of beadwork.
oh, okay. All right. I was thinking you was a painter. First correction.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dyani White Hawk. I'm Sicangu Lakota, member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe in Rosebud, South Dakota, through my mom. And my dad is German and Welsh. I grew up in Wisconsin and started at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas, and then transferred here to the Institute of American Indian Arts, where I got my bachelor's degree in studio arts. And then I continued on and got my master's degree at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the painting department, and worked for just shy of 4 years as a curator in Minneapolis for a contemporary Native arts gallery called All My Relations Gallery. And then I've done a number of independent contract curatorial jobs and things of the sort. So I do a lot of research in my own artwork of historical objects, and pull inspiration from Western abstract painting trajectory, the history of that, and predominantly Lakota art forms, historical Lakota art forms, but I have a passion for Native arts at large and have seen a lot of both historical and contemporary. So when we came here on the tour for the NASA conference, and we came in and I was just geeked out, excited by this exhibition. I was running around with my friends like, oh my God, did you see this? Did you see this? Did you? Like, we were just freaking out because it's an amazing collection. And then, it was, Bruce had asked me before I came here if I'd be willing to do this talk. So when I got here and got to actually see all the objects, then I was really excited. So I am predominantly a painter, but I do mixed media work because some of my introduction into artwork as a young person was through making beadwork and sewing and things of the sort. And so beadwork, porcupine quill work, and painting are the three things that I do most. And oftentimes most of the time now those things all take place on a canvas as opposed to regalia or things of the sort. But so yeah, that's a little bit about who I am and my background, and then that will play quite a bit into what we end up talking about.
So Ted, as I mentioned, the thing about Ted is he created exhibitions, and 3 spectacular exhibitions, which really are the keystones for many of the ways that we think about Native art in the sort of scholarly museum world, and were very influential in getting the dominant, the non-Native part of society to look at Native people in a very different and much more positive way. And the exhibition is based around those 3 exhibitions. And through those exhibitions, Ted's life was entirely changed. He was a by-the-book, Yale-trained art historian. And for some reason, he put all that to the side. No, I know what the reasons are, but he just put it all to the side to begin these driving trips out of his life and really be family and relationships with Native people throughout North America. And part of that relationship was Ted's transformation from a suit and tie guy to being like this. And he wore this pendant and belt buckle very often. And this watch was one of his favorite things that he had. And the watch was given to him by Joyce Growing Thunder. We're going to talk about Joyce a little bit. But Joyce felt that Ted had that white man habit, as she put it, that he was always going like this, just checking on the time. And so she gave him a watch without a watch in it, so that he would learn to relax and be in the situation instead of worrying about always where he needed to be next or whether he spent too much time or whatever that was, that he could just be where he was and just be with the people that he was. Someone else told me, I asked Emil from Many Horses, who's a curator at NMAI, I asked Emil about Ted and why he got along with people, and he said he was just easy. He was just easy to be with. He didn't demand anything, but he liked to read. One night he said Joyce told him a story that they were talking and things were going on and all these things, and they looked up and they looked around for Ted, and he was missing, and they found him in the teepee with a flashlight reading a book. One of his great passions.
Well, one of Ted's favorite lines was just go with the flow. And I remember my parents, my dad, very kind of wonderful man, also art historian, medievalist at the Metropolitan. But, you know, New Yorker uptight. And so when Ted would come visit us at the holidays, Ted would just be lounging around, whatever you want to do, go with the flow. And my dad's like all over the place. So it was a wonderful contrast to see that. And when I came to visit him here, I really understood what that was all about. So.
Come on this way. Come on in this section here. I think one of the pleasures of walking around with anyone, particularly someone as talented as Dyani, is her geeking out. I guess I won't be able to keep using that thing.
And no, it's good. It's appropriate response.
But we walked in this section the other day, and I could tell you what this section of the exhibition is about. It's about a 1976 and then again a 1977 exhibition called Sacred Circles. It was all historic materials. It was Ted trying to get things, to get people, the visitors, to see them as art and not artifact or ethnology. So Dyani walked in here the other day, and she talked about these mittens here, if you'd like to say a few things.
This is my favorite moment in this entire exhibition. There are so many phenomenal pieces in this exhibit and in this collection. It's really quite exciting. But as somebody who does porcupine quill work and knows how difficult it is and knows how challenging it is and knows what it takes to make the particular stitches and to make something refined, these are amazing. So take some time. I think one thing that I think is really important when you look at this exhibit and any other exhibit on historical objects or contemporary objects for that matter, is if you can think about, take some time to think about, try and set yourself in a place of imagination, making something from point beginning to point end, and every step in between. It's huge. So these pieces start before any of the design work. They start in collection of quills. And I have a couple of friends here with me. We spent last night trying to pull porcupine quills out of porcupine hide. So when you look at something like this, there's hide tanning, hunting, hide tanning, hunting porcupine, collecting porcupine quills, cleaning porcupine quills, dyeing porcupine quills, sorting porcupine quills by size. All of that comes in before you even get to the actual production of it. And then the ability that this person was really, really good. Because the quill work on here is immaculate. It's the ability to get these super fine lines is just amazing. So quills come, I was gonna bring some with me and then I forgot last night because we were all into what we were trying to accomplish. But when you pull quills from a porcupine, they come in all different sizes. They can be really, really short to really, really long, and then they have all different diameters. And so in order to make the design work that you see in this pair of gloves, they're all really fine quills. They have to be really thin. The diameter has to be very small in order to accomplish this fine line work. Even those, like when you look at, so I love quill work, so we'll probably talk a lot about that. But when you look at the cuffs and when you look at these, the quills in these are smaller even than the quills in these cuffs. But another thing that makes quill work spectacular when you look at these, if you look at the background of the red on those cuffs, it's really easy to see that person had like exceptional sorting abilities even, because the individual line that you see that creates an individual like stroke in that background patterning is all even. So even that, it's it's really challenging. And then these tiny, tiny, tiny little like outline lines, like in between that center diamond space, are outlining those kind of like, almost looks like, you know, abstract bird formations or something. Not saying it is, by the way. Those are like, those are like the thinnest that are almost like a hair. And there's another quill piece over there that I'll show you. So look at these before we keep walking. And look at that outlining stitch, and I'll show you an example of what that stitch looks like over there that's done in a much bigger quill, so you can see what it looks like. So the fact that you can't even really see the stitch because this is so small, and that you can't see the thread is amazing.
Can you tell us where they're from?
Oh, there it says Sioux or Métis, which is Métis is Canada, and Métis is generally mixed French and any tribe, right? Yeah. So they're not sure which it is, and if like because of this, like if I had to do I'm not a historian, but just from my experience, if I had to do a wild guess, like I understand the Métis attribution just because of the shape of them. But the quill work designs are really interesting because they do really, they say Dakota in a lot of ways, yeah, but not in every way. Yeah. So it's interesting, and so that I understand why they're, you know, it's like a toss-up, and so it may have been somebody who had multiple influences from different places. And
I think one of the things that Ted really understood was that this idea that tribal styles are hermetically sealed, that they're just one thing, and the desire of white society to make tribes consistent over time. So the difference between old and new, traditional, contemporary. So he understood that those barriers were non-existent. So the collection like this, and so many pieces in the collection, that's what I find mostly in talking to artists and other scholars. It's like, are you sure it's that? But it's the best part of the collection to not try and put everybody into boxes, which has always been a problem with Native arts in particular.
What's remarkable about those is how beautifully preserved they are. Is there a story behind that? They couldn't have been 1830s.
Yes, it says 1830, and it's Minnesota or Manitoba, which is also funny.
I think that a lot of what gets passed on through generations are things that are highly prized. And so I think the way Dyani talks about them, it's something that was put away or kept for special occasions. On the other hand, things can be so beautiful that are some people would say utilitarian, like the snowshoes. They're just very beautiful objects, and they do have wear on them. So I think people look for keep things separately, or things are sold out, for different reasons, and that's particularly on these organic materials which wear out.
Well,
So.
the cool work is especially lay-by. I mean, that's what's so amazing, and it's cold and wet up there, so.
Yeah. There's the other thing that I'd point out is there's 7 different types of stitching on these alone. So techniques and how to make a particular design. Within the design work down here on the cuff, the wavy lines, there's 2 different stitches. The kind of striped diagonal line up there is another 2 different kind of stitches. The stitch that's in between those, what I was calling bird ones, that's a 5th. And then where the circle is in the middle, that's a 6th. And then the blue and white zigzag outside of the circle is a 7th kind of stitch. So this person really was very gifted.
Ceremonial, or because they're so beautiful and so well preserved, or the utilitarian, are they fur lined and
Not for long.
No, I wouldn't pretend to. No, I don't think so. I think they're just
When you said it says Lakota to you, does
Dakota.
Dakota? I suppose Terry Greaves brought this up in our first walkthrough, that the pattern and what's on these pieces actually is a language,
Yeah.
which she can't necessarily read, but it meant something to the person who
Right.
was making it and who they were giving it to. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest things that I talk about in my own work is the misconception that when you look at tribal artwork, that it's just pretty designs. Historically, these things have been relegated to the area of craft or ethnography, or and it's been like separated from this idea of art with a capital A, right? Fine art, because it doesn't have the same conceptual background, or it doesn't have, but that's really very untrue. There's so much, when you look at, if I was looking at a piece of Lakota beadwork, there's designs within those that aren't, it's not just a pretty design, those designs are symbols. And those symbols, within those symbols is embedded meaning, knowledge of cosmology, worldviews, family signatures, stories. There's so much language being spoken through that abstraction that it's not that simple. And as people have kind of relegated it to for years and years and years. And so if you are from that region and you know what those symbols mean and those stories that come with it, then you can read it, if you have that connection to what that is. And so one thing that I talk about in my own work that is relevant to all of these pieces is the idea that when people talk about fine art in the Western tradition, and there's generations of conversations. That's what makes it significant. That's where most of the academic response comes from, is every generation responded to the generation before them. And that's how you have art movements, right? And those movements are responses to things that either, it's developing an idea, or it's responding to and rejecting an idea, or something of the sort, and it goes on and on and on. I believe the same thing has been happening in our art forms. Generations worth of conversations, generations worth of passing down knowledge, generations worth of adaptation, moving, changing, responding, thinking, being in, participating in a current artistic dialogue with previous pieces and new pieces, and what it means to navigate this space today as opposed to what it meant to navigate that space 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago. Different contexts, oftentimes different intentionality, but very, very similar. And so I really, I find it really problematic within Western academic circles and art to separate those things and to not really fully realize that there are a lot of commonalities in that sense. Context, totally different. I'll emphasize that. But it's important that people understand that there's just as much knowledge, response, and conversation within Native art forms as there is any other art form.
I think that's absolutely true. And Sacred Circles as an exhibition for Ted sort of did the Western art thing, where he decided what was art. He thought it was beautiful, but I think that his brain was already working towards the idea of how these things interact inside of the cultures themselves. And I think the life-changing event, I mean, there's many things that happened through his life, but I really think the life-changing event for him in Sacred Circles was when it showed in Kansas City for 9 weeks. They had Native people in the gallery every day of every one of those 9 weeks. So he met people from all over North America. People danced and they demonstrated and they talked and sang and did all these different things. And I think it began to change his mind. And that's when he got into his car and started driving following that, and got more ideas about relationships and the ongoing continuity of people instead of this idea of a break with the past. The one thing I would just add, I think doing great, this is, the one thing I would add, when you look at Native art, I think there are some different systems, some different things about the way that one views the art, and certainly Dyani has hit on the materials part, and the importance of the materials, and the interaction of the artist with materials. Not to say that a painter doesn't go to the store and buy a certain brand of paint and mix his paint, but this idea of the porcupine is a little more different than going to the store and buying a tube of paint, if I can have that. It's the same with the basket materials and the hair and the hides and so on, because there's so much interaction between the medias. But I'd also go and look at this chisel here with the bear handle and just say something about intimacy in Native art, which I think is incredibly important. And I think you find this if you look through things, and there's designs in a lot of places. There are jewelers that are working today over the last few decades who have reintegrated intimacy. And the intimacy is that when you look at a bracelet, right, the bracelet is decorated, and everybody can see the bracelet like that, but people are beginning to decorate the backside. So it's a private conversation. In the same way, with that bear, the first thing you do to use the chisel is you cover the bear up, right? So the bear is really between the user and the chisel, rather than everybody watching the person carving or whatever. And so you could say, for example, that the bear is just non-functional. It's just decorative. But in fact, the chisel wouldn't work as well unless you had the bear carved on it. Everybody knows that. So the idea of intimacy, I think, is an incredibly important part of the way that these art systems work.
Well, even just knowledge, like, I'm not going to pretend to know much about these snowshoes because I really don't. I think they're phenomenal. Again, if you think about actually physically making these and what it takes, the knowledge of weaving to make these not only aesthetically perfect, but aesthetically, like, completely functional. You know, that's amazing. So in the intimacy part and the relationship part, you also have to have the knowledge of harvesting. Which particular plant and what its qualities are, when that's to be harvested, what the correct ways are to harvest those things, how to shape and bend the wood in a particular farm. And there's so much knowledge, and then relationships, an understanding of place and a relationship with that place, and what those materials mean to you and your tribal, your own tribe. And then, because there's relationships within those things, and really profound knowledge. And so it's not even, you can go on and on about the aesthetics of a piece, but there's so much more beyond that. And once you really understand the whole picture, then the amazingness of the piece just, and you're like, oh, it's phenomenal.
They grow more beautiful.
Yeah.
You can understand some of the background. They really grow more and more beautiful.
Yeah. When Bruce and I were looking at these too, like, even if you look on the top third of these, there's that design that again, I don't know anything about weaving, but I know that the maker had to make really precise decisions to make that design happen. And it would have been extra work, and it came out beautifully, and it probably means something that I can't talk to you about. But yeah, even that moment, I think, is just gorgeous. And there's, just design work even in the bottom part, you can see, they're phenomenal.
Here. When Dyani and I looked at this section the other day, this is in Lost and Found Traditions. This is something that Ted wandered around North America for 5 or 6 years and collected about 800 pieces that then started as an exhibition opening in New York in 1986. And he often bought a piece for the exhibition, which was traveled through American Federation for the Arts, and bought a piece for himself. And then through the years of driving and meeting those same people over and over again, he always bought another piece and another piece and another piece. And one of the things we were looking at the other day is this belt here, which is Mono Lake Paiute from the east side of the Sierra Nevadas in California. And we were talking about the colors.
Mm-hmm.
And that if you took the colors and you put them like, come around this way so people can see it. And if we took the colors out and we put them like on a sheet of paper, right, like with paint or something like that, they wouldn't stand up very well. But one of the amazing things about this belt is that this woman who has made this belt has made it look symmetrical, but it's totally asymmetrical, and taken a variety of colors that have no business together on one belt and made the whole thing work, which is one of the astounding characteristics of this particular belt. I don't know what other pieces you really enjoyed in here. Let me get out of the way so you can talk.
I mean, a lot of these colors, they're older beads. So those of us that do beadwork kind of really fiend over these colors because they are the old-looking colors and they're exciting, and the beads are old, and that's, you know, as somebody who does beadwork, we want those. But I mean, if you think about it, you know, like even if I was going to go and start out a new project and I took each of those colors, like Bruce said, and I had them all lined up, I most likely wouldn't necessarily pair these. So if you spend some time even looking at what Bruce is talking about, going down the patterning of this, and it feels completely balanced. But that feat is pretty amazing because it's really, like Bruce is talking about, if you look at these two red stars down on this bottom half, and you look above it and you look below it, the section above it is quite a bit wider than the section below it. But then you realize that there's that section below it, which is almost not, but it's close to the pattern above it. It's actually like a middle space for the blue star below it, and then size-wise, the pattern below the blue star is the same as the pattern. So this is super complex to like keep up with the patterning and figuring out how am I going to change it up just enough that it's exciting, but it's also going to feel and be completely balanced. And where you look at it and you feel like it's this consistent pattern, but actually spend some time with it, and it's really not. It's really, so it's very sophisticated. It's very, take an intense amount of planning. But
I'm moving you along. I'm sorry.
No,
I wanted you to talk about Maynard White Owl's piece as well.
About the bag?
The bag.
Okay.
This is 1986. Ted purchased this at Indian Market. 1992. He purchased it from Maynard White Owl. I graduate, by the way. The blue bag.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that, and then I'll come back to this. It's okay. No, because Bruce and I were having fun talking about this too. What's so exciting about this piece for me, and I was asking Bruce if he knew when this started, because this plateau style bag with like a flat background and design work on the top, sometimes they're really narrative, sometimes they're not. But if you look at the turquoise in the background, it's all patterned. And in a lot of the older bags, that is completely flat. You know, the lines are all lined up. And so that patterning of all the circles behind there is really, I love that style of beadwork. And so it's fairly popular with really accomplished beadworkers today, but accomplished beadworkers. Not very many people do that on a regular basis, because that would be, I mean, to make them all fit and lay completely perfectly is amazing. It requires a lot of finesse and knowledge of your material. And then if you look in the pink leaves on the bottom, even that from back here reads as though it's flat, but there's design work, really beautiful geometric design work within that pink leaf on the bottom. So it's an extremely accomplished bag, and it's really impressive. And I'd like to know who the first person was that decided, ooh, that flat background needs to have.
And these bags are really cool because up in this area, this is Western Washington, Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon, And this is a type of social community dances, and people carry the bags or wear them on their belts. So when there's like a parade of women that walk by, and when they walk by, everybody's life can be read. It's the idea again of like the Dakota design, how it reads back into those families. So it's the same thing that you're walking by in this row of other people, but your own story is there for other community members to know something about them. And they're just one of the most creative things too. They were long, in the art world, they were long dismissed because they often have contemporary stuff. So it's not just all beadwork, but they have eagles from NRA and different things like that on them. So people didn't think they were Indian enough was the problem.
Too much Western influence, yeah.
Thank goodness. Anyways,
So,
you're going to talk about these boxes
yeah,
here.
these little, what do they call those when they're stacking, when there's another telescoping, yeah, nesting, yeah, there you go. Okay, so these are birch bark, sweetgrass, and porcupine quills. I have a friend that makes boxes, birch bark boxes, with this style of porcupine quill work. So I've gotten to see them in process. I don't do them myself, but again, with these, I feel like there's 2 or 3 things to think about. One, harvesting birch bark is an old and acquired skill. You have to know how to collect the bark without killing the tree. There's only certain times of the year you can collect the bark and certain ways that you can do it. And then you either have to work the bark, you have to peel the bark and get it all prepped, but then you either have to work it fast enough, or now my friend has a big freezer in his living room and he bags and freezes the bark so that he can work with it all year long. So that's something to think about. Like there's a time limit, even when you collect it, how you collect it, when you use it, how long you can use it for. All of that is a specific and acquired knowledge, And then the quill work in these is really interesting. It's done totally differently than the quill work we looked at on the gloves. So that's stitched on. These are pulled through. So holes are made in the birch bark, and you pull a quill out and pull a quill down. You stretch it and pull it back in, and the bark holds the quill in place. And then you cut the edges, and then it's covered up by another piece of bark on the backside. So if you peeled it open, you could see all the little prickly ends of the quills. The other thing that I think is, this is the part I nerd out about, is really this little one, oh my gosh, making that, if you think about trying to hold that tiny, tiny piece of bark and then get those tiny holes in there and do the tiny quill work without busting anything, is really cool. I mean, it would be really difficult. And then all the little stitches, it's really skilled. It's really very skilled. The other thing that's important about this and this in this case is the idea of catering to tourism. And people, a lot of times those efforts get negated, but I really think they deserve a lot more credit than oftentimes they're given. Some of the tourist art has created long living conversations within our work. And there's some really amazing pieces that have been made to fulfill that tourist market. And it doesn't mean that there's any less skill or any less knowledge, but there's a response to a market and a response to the need to feed your families. And any working artist is doing that today. So I wouldn't write them off as quickly as other people would. And it's really, this little set is amazing. And there's, again, still all that knowledge and skill, but play and creativity and responding to a current environment, So, there's all of the pieces that go into this are all of that sweetgrass, those tiny little braids, all of that would have had to been made before you even start the piece. And so it's really, I think it's very representative of a very skilled and smart maker.
When you make something small, basically when you make something small, you can use the same size materials or the same size designs and just make it more quickly or simplify it. Or, like these pieces, you can whittle down your materials to make it the same number of stitches as a large piece would have, just by decreasing the size of the diameters of things. And that's one of the things that, to toss them off as tourists or just curiosities is just not a good way to think about them. People always responded to the environment. If it was a dry year here in the Southwest, that means pottery changed up, but there were other things that changed up because the crops weren't as good. So people's response to the world around them, white people, tourism, dryness, no corn, whatever it might be, is always in existence. So I think this is a tourist art, like you're saying, is a strong continuation. One of the other things, we're never going to move to the moccasin case. I'm just trying to keep people on their feet. But I just wanted to mention, all the pieces are stories. So Ted saw this piece in about 2002, this lying down frog here, by Walt Harris, who's from Gitxsan. And Walt Harris was the leader of the group of dancers who came to open Sacred Circles on April 19, 1977 to Kansas City and raised a pole on the museum's grounds, which are still there. And he saw the piece, and for him, it was all about Walt. He thought the frog was cute or something, he says, like that, but it's really about that story and that person. In the same way, this cane in here, which is in this corner here, that cane is by David Boxley. So David is actually a very good friend of my wife and my own. We've worked with him a lot over the years, and David's an extraordinary guy. But so my wife sent him a picture of it and an email, said, "What's this, David?" And Ted had purchased it in Ketchikan in 1979. And David's story back is so much like David. He hadn't decided exactly what he was going to do about his native side, in the sense that he was coaching high school basketball, and he hadn't decided he was going to be a full-time artist in 1979. And he said, I made these because I could still coach and make money and sell a few things. So something that was a few $100s then. He just finished a huge commission for the new cultural center in Juneau, it's the Alaska, and it's a 46 by 40 house front that he carved for them, compared to these first things that he did probably at night, exhausted from the day working as a teacher. So the stories of each piece, continue to grow. Why don't we go? Is there anything else in here?
Do you want to talk about Terry's